Chapter 9, Hinduism and Buddhism, 1500 to 1200 CE. In this chapter, we are going to look at just a broad definition of religion, and then we will look at Hinduism, its history and practice, and then Buddhism, its history and practice. And then we'll compare Hinduism and Buddhism and look at what difference they make in our world today. Organized religious groups are usually built on the religious experiences and teachings proclaimed by their founders and their early teachers. And this is certainly the case for the 5 religions that we're going to talk about in the next couple of chapters. And many of these experiences are miraculous. They are not something that would happen in an everyday experience, and they can neither be proved or disproved. And most of that has to do with divine intervention, the gods interfering in human life. Historians, though, cannot study miracles. Historical study seeks to prove events, and you can't prove miracles. But by definition, miracles are a matter of faith, not of proof anyway. So I guess the question is, what can historians study? And when looking at religion, one of the things they can study is the sanctification of time. And that is just looking at each religion's calendar. What events do they mark as important? What special rituals and celebrations and fasts and assemblies do they have? What rites of passage do they have? Do they have a birth rite of passage, one for puberty or marriage or death? These are things that historians can study to better learn what goes on in these religions. Another thing that historians can study when looking at different religions is the sanctification of space. And this is just the geography of that religion. What shrines do they worship at? Most of the time, it's where something miraculous happened, or where were the saints born, or where did they flourish, or where did they die? What relics do they have, and where are they located? So this is just looking at where that religion has taken place and where it is celebrated. Historians also gain a lot of insight from the language and literature of each religion. The 5 religions that we're going to talk about have one or many more religious texts in which historians can gain valuable information. Another one is the sanctification of artistic and creative endeavor. Religious sensibilities often inspire specific creative efforts, and religious groups often encourage the creation of art and music to express their message. Another one is the sanctification of family and ancestors. Many religions celebrate life cycle and past generations, and some even visit the graves and shrines of people who have died before them to worship or pray there. So the way in which they treat their family and their ancestors is another indication to historians as to what the religion is like. And finally, historians can study the creation of religious organization itself. And so this is a move from how the religion affects an individual to how it affects the group, and how it develops in between. So does it have a hierarchy, like with priests at the top, or do they have bishops at the top of the religious hierarchy, or do they have no hierarchy? These are all questions asked by historians about the religious organization of different religions. So one question that plagues historians regarding Hinduism is, where and how did it originate? Other major religions have like an inspiring event or a birth or something from which that religion emerged. But Hinduism is just an amalgam of different traditions, different people, different records. evolved before people were recording history or even writing things down. So where did it come from? People initially believed that it was Aryan because of the use of Sanskrit, which is an Indo-Aryan language. But recently, historians have suggested that maybe it actually originated from people who were already in the Indus Valley. So anthropologists, historians are not sure exactly where it came from. They just know that it is a collaboration of many different beliefs from many different people. Okay, so sacred geography and pilgrimage. One of the things that's different about Hinduism is that it is located almost entirely in the Indian subcontinent. Almost all practicing Hindus live in India or are of Indian descent. So this is not as diverse as some other religions are. Within India, the places that were visited by saints and different gods have become shrines and pilgrim destinations. So people travel from all over India to these sites, and interestingly, modern transportation like trains and airplanes and buses and cars have actually facilitated this. So people, even today, make these pilgrimages across India. Each locality and city and village are also knit together by the sense of religious community. They join in prayer together. They have pictures and statues of their gods and religious shrines that they go to worship. So it almost serves as a place for close-knit community. So we mentioned the Rig Veda in chapter 8. And this is the oldest of the 4 Vedas, which is the primary religious Hindu text. The Rig Veda was composed between 1500 and 1200 BCE, and it's got a little over 1,000 verses of Sanskrit poetry that invokes the early gods and makes some speculations about the creation of the world, although they don't really claim to offer specific answers. Another important belief to Hinduism is the caste system, and this was actually introduced by the Rig Veda as a result of the sacrifice of Purusha, a mythical creature, into 4 parts. So the caste, of course, is hierarchical and hereditary, and speculations of purpose include maintaining order among the diverse people of India, preserving frozen economic system, or just suppressing subject people. And I think the caste system does a good job of all 3 of those. So they believe that the caste system of today existed in the distant past as well. And in many instances, the caste was often more important than even the government. Okay, so Hindu gods. We're not going to go through all of these because there are actually thousands, but I'll give you the top 4, and I'm going to test this feature out. We'll set this over here so I can spell them for you. The first one is Brahma, and Brahma is the Hindu creator god, and his 4 heads and arms are supposed to represent the 4 Vedas, or the scriptures, the castes, and the yugas, or the eras of the world. The second god is Krishna. This is another important Hindu god, and he is supposedly the 8th avatar or reincarnation of Vishnu, who is depicted with blue or black skin. And he is remembered for his skills as a warrior and a lover. And then the next one is Shiva. And this is the god of destruction, who dances in a circle and fire. And that symbolizes the eternal cycle of creation and destruction. And then lastly, Vishnu, which, remember, Krishna is the 8th incarnation of Vishnu. But Vishnu is the preserver, a kind god who protects those who worship him, banishes bad luck, and supposedly restores good health. Okay, so another important religious text to the Hindus is the Brahmanas and the Upanishads. And these are not as central to Hinduism as the Vedas, but they are still read by most Hindus. The Brahmanas were written somewhere between 900 and 500 BCE, and they mostly talk about Hindu rituals and myths. And then the Upanishads were written between 800 and 500 BCE, so around the same time. And it really addresses two things. And the first is the concept of Brahman. And we've seen that word or words that look like that a lot. But in this instance, it's talking about the ultimate reality or the truth about the cosmos. And then it talks also about Atman or Atman. And this is just your soul or yourself. And so one of the central ideas of the Upanishads is to know your Atman or know your soul. So continuing with central beliefs, the Bhagavad Gita, which we mentioned in chapter 8 as well, is a part of the Mahabharata. And this does a couple of important things. The first thing is that it talks about the duties and meaning of life and death. It says that warriors must fulfill their dharma or their purpose in life by fighting. It talks about Krishna, one of the Hindu gods, the blue skin god. It says that he is not Aryan. And then it talks about the role of women as prestigious. And it actually gives women a more prestigious position than in the Ramayana, where Rama's wife Sita was subservient. So the Puranas are another important religious text, and this one focuses almost entirely on Vishnu and Shiva, which are the most popular of the Hindu gods. And the focal point there is that it says that goddesses serve as companions to the powerful male gods. And this really just shows the balance of the suppressed vision of women in earlier Hindu literature and that which is in later Hindu literature. So sometime after 600 CE, there was a major shift that took place in Hindu worship, and that was sacrifice was replaced with personal prayer. And most of the time they would pray to a statue or to a picture, but this type of worship replaced sacrifice. And most of the time the sacrifice was cattle. Remember in the last chapter we talked about Brahmin, the people of the Brahmin caste were criticized because they were sacrificing cattle that could have been very useful in feeding the people. So as sacrifice kind of faded away, Hindus built temples of great beauty, and they filled these temples with lots and lots of artwork and mostly sculptures and paintings that were a form of religious worship. So, religion and rule. It has been commonplace for a while for people in charge to use religion in order to subject the people. And as early as the 700s CE, new leaders and new rulers who were taking lands occupied by tribal peoples often would get Brahmin priests to overawe these tribal peoples with their learning, their holiness, their rituals, and use that to persuade the tribespeople to fall in line with the proper authority of the king. And to pacify these tribal peoples, their gods might be incorporated into the array of gods already worshipped in the temple of Hinduism. So in exchange for their support, the kings would then reward priests with land grants, court subsidies, and temples in exchange for them getting the people to respect the king. So it was not usually the goal of Hinduism to attract people outside of India, but Southeast Asia became an exception to that rule. And the reason for that was trade. There were trade contacts between India and Southeast Asia. Think modern day China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar, that date back to about 150 BCE. And so by the 3rd century CE, Funan had accepted many of the elements of Indian culture, and that includes religion, Hinduism, and some of their political practices. And Sanskrit was in use. They used Indian technology for irrigation and farming. And by the 5th century, Sanskrit, Indian calendars, Indian gods, particularly Shiva and Vishnu, were worshipped, as were the representations of the Buddha. And so there were even Hindu temples in Southeast Asia, and Brahmin priests that showed up to staff them.